The car pulled away and I was standing there on the side of a Highway 401 in the middle of November, watching my son's taillights disappear into the darkness. No jacket, no bag, no cell phone signal. Just me, 68 years old, and the cold wind coming off the lake. He'd been so angry, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he gripped it, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "Figure it out, old man," he'd said. And then he was gone. Those 4 words echoing in my head like a sentence. "Figure it out, old man. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I spent 42 years as a high school teacher. I taught English literature for 4 decades, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. I helped thousands of kids understand the stories that matter, the narratives that define us, the books that change how you see the world. I loved that work. I was good at it. Parents would write me letters saying their kids hated reading until they got to my class. That meant something to me. It still does. Then I retired 7 years ago, at 61, because Patricia wanted us to have time while we were still young enough to enjoy it. My wife Patricia was still alive then. We had plans, real plans. Travel, a cottage rental program we'd looked into, maybe volunteering at the library on the weekends. We'd saved for it carefully, or we thought we had. But Patricia got sick. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that doesn't give you time to adjust to the diagnosis before it's already too late. One moment she's feeling tired and getting headaches, and 6 months later you're attending her funeral. We burned through everything. Insurance covered maybe 30% of it, and the rest came from our savings, from the retirement fund we'd carefully built over 40 years of teaching, from second mortgages and lines of credit we took against the house. When she died, there was almost nothing left. The house was paid for, thank God, but the rest was gone. Every account we'd built was depleted. Every investment we'd made was liquidated. My pension was decent enough to live modestly on, but not enough to maintain the property and live comfortably at the same time. So I adjusted. I made it work. I cut back on everything. I didn't travel. I didn't eat out. I did the work on the house myself rather than paying contractors. For 5 years, I made it work, and I was okay with it, because I was still here, still alive, still able to think about Patricia every morning when I woke up. My son David was another story entirely. David was born in 1985. He was always smart, quick-minded, charming in that effortless way some people have. From kindergarten on, people liked him. Teachers liked him. Other kids liked him. He could talk his way out of trouble, could convince people to do things for him just by asking the right way, but he'd never quite found his way as an adult. He'd started college twice and dropped out both times, once because the classes weren't rigorous enough, once because the professor had it out for him. He'd had 3 jobs in 5 years. Each one ended the same way. Some conflict with authority, some perceived slight, some situation where everyone else was wrong, and only David could see the truth. He'd get frustrated and quit, or he'd be fired for insubordination. I'd always wondered if he blamed me for that, if he thought I'd been too easy on him growing up, or not easy enough, or something else entirely that I couldn't figure out. When Patricia was in the hospital, he came to visit maybe twice in the 8 months of her illness. He said he couldn't handle seeing her like that after she died. He wasn't around much either. I thought he was grieving, that he needed space, or maybe he was uncomfortable around my grief. But then about 18 months ago he started calling more frequently. How was I doing? Was I managing okay on my pension? Did I need anything? I should have been suspicious. I wasn't. The attention was nice at first because I was lonely. The house felt too big, too empty. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning sometimes and forget that Patricia wasn't in the next room. I'd go downstairs at dawn, expecting to hear her moving around, starting coffee. I'd stand in the kitchen for a moment before remembering. Every single day for the first 6 months after she died, I had to remember that she was gone, so when David started calling and asking about my finances, I didn't think much of it initially. I thought he was being considerate, maybe trying to rebuild his relationship with me. I thought maybe her death had changed something in him, made him realize what mattered. The first request came on a Tuesday in May. He called around dinner time. "Dad, I've got this opportunity. A buddy of mine, Marcus, he's starting a construction company. They're looking for investors. I've got some money saved up, but I need another 15,000 to get in properly. Make sure I've got real equity. This could be big, Dad. This is the opportunity I've been waiting for." The enthusiasm in his voice was palpable. Even through the phone, I was skeptical. I'd heard variations of this before over the years. Every few years David would latch onto something, convinced it was the key to everything, and then it would fall apart. But he sounded different this time. He sounded alive in a way that took me back to when he was a kid, before the disappointment started piling up, before he learned that life doesn't always reward ambition and hard work the way you're told it will. So I said I'd think about it. He called 3 more times that week: Wednesday afternoon, Thursday evening, Friday morning before I'd even finished my coffee. Each time his pitch got more refined, more desperate, more urgent. By the time Friday came around, I'd convinced myself. I had some money in a separate account set aside for emergencies. 15,000 wasn't all of it, but it was most. I told myself it was insurance anyway. Insurance that would bring my son back into my life. Insurance that would give him the start he needed. I had him come by the house. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework decades ago. I filled out a check slowly, deliberately, giving myself time to back out. But I didn't back out. I wrote his name on the line, the amount in the box, and signed my name when I slid it across the table to him. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he reached across and hugged me. Actually hugged me. Something he hadn't done since before his mother got sick. He thanked me. He said it would change everything. He'd make me proud. That was the thing that got me, that hook they had me on, that he wanted to make me proud. That was important to me, hearing that my son wanted to make me proud. 2 months later, in July, he called again. The business had hit some complications. There were unexpected permits, building code issues, something about the city planning department. They needed to adjust their approach, but to do that they needed capital to pivot. The original money hadn't vanished, he explained. It was tied up in the first property. They just needed liquidity to make moves on a second opportunity. Could I help out again? Just another 10,000? It would be short term, he said. Once the first project cleared, I'd get it back with interest. I heard the confidence in his voice, the way a salesman talks when they're closing the deal. He'd learned something in those 2 months, or he was showing a side of himself I'd never seen before. 10,000 felt like a lot. My line of credit wasn't infinite. I had less money available this time than I'd had in May, but I took it from my line of credit anyway. 10,000. When he picked up the check, he didn't hug me this time. He just thanked me professionally, like a businessman accepting an investment. Something shifted in that moment, but I didn't recognize it as a warning. I was making it work, I told myself. This is what families do. You help each other. That's what I'd taught Patricia to understand, what I'd tried to model for David his whole life. Generosity, investment in each other, trust. These were the values I'd built my marriage on, my career on. I wasn't about to change them now, but it kept happening. August. A phone call saying they needed equipment they hadn't anticipated. Could I come through with 5,000? I said yes without even thinking about it. September, another request. He needed money for a truck that the business needed. 12,000. He sounded tired on that call. When I asked if everything was okay, he said work was just stressful. But this truck would change things. They'd be able to expand the routes they could service. 12,000. I said yes. October. A personal emergency. Something about a car loan he couldn't cover this month just until he got paid from his day job, 8,000. I remember that call specifically because I asked him directly if he was in trouble. Real trouble. He said, "No, Dad, I'm fine. I just got overextended on a car purchase and I need to get caught up. It would all be back to normal next month." I believed him because I wanted to. Each request was smaller than the last, which made them easier to say yes to. Each request came with the same pattern. First the enthusiasm, the promise that this was temporary, that things were just about to turn around. Then the guilt, subtle and masterful. The implication that I was letting him down if I didn't help, that I was the reason things weren't working out. By November, I'd given him $55,000 over 6 months. I'd pulled from retirement accounts with penalties that meant I lost roughly $18,000 in total value. I'd increased the line of credit from $50,000 to $85,000. I'd skipped property maintenance that I probably shouldn't have skipped. The roof needed work. The furnace was making sounds it shouldn't make. I'd told myself I'd handle it next year. My financial advisor would have had a heart attack if he'd known what I was doing. We hadn't spoken since August. I hadn't returned his calls because I didn't want to hear what he would say. When David called on November 10th and asked for another 20,000, something inside me finally broke. Not snapped, not suddenly, but broke like a dam that's been holding too long. I said no. "I don't have 20,000 to give you, David. I've given you $55,000 since May. I don't know what you're doing with it, but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep draining my security for something I don't understand." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You don't trust me. You've never trusted me. You want me to fail. You're like Mum. You wanted her to fail too, in her own way, with all her doubts about what I could do." The bitterness in his voice was shocking. "Your mother loved you," I said carefully, "and I love you. I love. But I can't set myself on fire to keep you warm. That's not love. That's enabling." He hung up. He called back 3 days later. He said he was coming by the house, that we needed to talk face to face. When he arrived, he was calmer, almost apologetic. He said he had a plan, that he understood my concerns. "There's something I need to do," he said. "It's important. I need to drive up to Muskoka for a business meeting. It's going to help everything turn around. Will you come with me? Just for the drive. We can talk about everything on the way, and when I get back, I can explain what's happening with the money. Just trust me one more time." The request was so simple. Just a car ride. Just a conversation. I'd been feeling guilty about saying no to his latest request, and here he was, offering me a chance to reconnect, to be part of his world, so I said yes. We left on a Saturday morning. I packed a small bag with a change of clothes and my wallet. David picked me up around 9. His car was cleaner than I expected it to be. No empty energy drink cans or fast food wrappers. No signs of someone spiralling. That seemed like a good sign. The drive north was quiet at first. The highway stretched out in front of us, and I tried to make conversation, asking about his life, about the company, about what was really going on. "How's Marcus doing?" I asked. "Is the first project moving forward?" He said it was fine, progressing. When I pressed for details, he gave me vague answers, something about setbacks and market conditions. Eventually I asked him directly, "David, where is all that money going? What's really happening?" I tried to keep my voice gentle, but I could hear the edge of accusation in it anyway. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. We were about 2 hours north of the city by then, somewhere around the Gravenhurst area. The highway was relatively clear, though it was starting to get cloudy. November in Ontario is this weird in-between season. Not yet winter, but summer's long gone. Everything's grey. He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. I began calculating how I'd handle it if he refused to talk, if he just kept driving north and wouldn't engage with me about any of this. Then he said, "You know what? I'm tired. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of trying to make you proud. I'm tired of feeling like I'm never enough. And I'm tired of asking for money from someone who clearly thinks I'm a failure." The bitterness in his voice was shocking. It was like hearing a stranger speak with my son's mouth. He took the next exit abruptly, his turn signal forgotten, pulling off into a rest stop without slowing down enough. The car bounced over the transition from highway to gravel. He parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment with his hands still on the steering wheel. Then he looked at me, and I didn't recognize the expression in his eyes. "I want you out," he said flatly. "Out of the car?" I asked. "Out of my life?" "Both, actually. Out of the car first. We're done." "I don't understand," I said. "We're not done. We just got here. We were supposed to talk." "Get out," he said. His voice was cold in a way that suggested this wasn't improvised. This had been planned. I said, "Get out." I reached for my door handle but hesitated. "David, don't do this. Just breathe. Let's talk about whatever this is." He reached across me, shoved my door open, and grabbed my jacket, the one Patricia had given me 2 years before she died. A nice jacket, good quality wool, the kind she'd saved up for to buy me for Christmas when she was already sick but didn't know how sick she was yet. He yanked it off my shoulders with such force that the collar caught on my ear and I felt a sharp pain. He threw it toward the back seat. Then he grabbed my bag, the one I'd packed that morning with my wallet inside, my phone, my change of clothes, everything. Get out of the car. When I didn't move fast enough, he physically shoved me. I stumbled out onto the gravel shoulder, my hands grasping for something to hold on to and finding only air I nearly fell. The moment my feet were clear, he slammed the door shut so hard the whole car shook. I reached for the handle, but he locked it with the button. He started the engine. "Don't do this," I said through the window. "David, I'm begging you, don't do this." He looked at me with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite satisfaction. It was just emptiness. The kind you see in someone's eyes when they've made a decision and they're committed to it. He rolled down the window. Maybe you should have thought about that before you said no to me, he said. Before you judged me. Before you made me feel like shit every time I asked for help. Every single time I came to you, you made it feel like I was asking for something unreasonable, like I was a failure. You made me into this. This is your fault. Then he hit the gas and reversed the car fast, did a 3-point turn without checking his mirrors, and headed back south. I stood there, watching him go. I stood there on the shoulder and watched him go. His car got smaller and smaller until it was just a speck, and then it was gone completely, swallowed up by the highway. When the car was out of sight, I realized I had nothing. No jacket, no bag, no phone, no money in my pockets, because I'd left my wallet in the bag. My glasses were the only thing I still had on me. They were starting to fog up from my own breath. I was standing on Highway 401 in November, with nothing but the clothes on my back, a thin shirt and an undershirt, and the sun was already starting to come down. It was probably 4:30 or 5 o'clock. November darkness comes early. I was 68 years old, stranded on the side of the highway by my own son, and I had no idea how I was going to survive the night if I didn't find shelter soon. I started walking south toward the direction we'd come, figuring there had to be a town or somewhere with some kind of service station. But the highway was exposed up there. The wind was picking up. It came off the water somewhere to the east, and it had teeth to it, real cold that went straight through my shirt. November on that part of the 401 corridor is no joke. It's farmland and small towns and long stretches of nothing between the towns. I walked for maybe an hour, my feet aching in shoes that weren't designed for long-distance walking. Traffic was sparse. A few cars passed me, maybe 4 or 5. One of them actually started to slow down but then sped up again. I must have looked like trouble. An old guy on the side of the road with no jacket in November probably doesn't scream trustworthy or safe. People don't stop for hitchhikers anymore, not like they used to. I found a rest area and went inside, thinking I could at least get warm, could call someone, could figure out what to do next. The attendant at the small convenience store inside looked at me like I was crazy when I came in with no jacket. He was eating a sandwich behind the counter, and he set it down when he saw me. "Can I help you?" he said, and I explained my situation. I was stranded. My ride had left me here. Could he call the police? An ambulance? Anybody? His expression didn't change much. He pulled out a phone and made the call to the local OPP detachment. An officer would be there in about 30 minutes, he said. I could wait inside. He gestured to a bench in the corner. I sat on the bench and tried to stop shaking. My hands were shaking so badly I clasped them together. I was shaking from the cold. Yes, but also from the shock of it. From the reality of what my son had done. While I waited, 2 truckers came in. They were big guys, the kind who spend their entire lives on the highway and know every story that plays out on these roads, every scam, every legitimate emergency that happens on this stretch of 401. One of them had weathered brown skin and a trucker's tan line, the pale band where his cap normally sat. He looked like he'd been doing this for at least 30 years. The other was younger, maybe 50, with a deliberate beard and tattoos on his arms, the kind of tattoos that tell a story if you know how to read the military in one arm, something about a family in the other. They got coffee and snacks and were heading to the counter when they noticed me sitting on the bench in my shirt sleeves, shaking. "You all right there, buddy?" the older one asked. "You don't look so good." I must have looked pretty rough because his voice had changed, gone from casual to concerned. I explained what had happened. I told them my son had left me here, that the police were on their way, that I was stranded. Something shifted in their expressions. They exchanged a look, and then the older trucker said, "That's not right. That's not right at all. No parent should be left like this." He came and sat down next to me, his bulk making the bench creak. "I'm Frank," he said. "That's Pete. We drive this route all the time, and we've seen some things, but a parent stranded like that doesn't sit right with us. Can I ask you something? What made your son do this?" There was no judgment in his voice. He was asking because he wanted to understand, and that understanding was going to help him help me. I told them about the money, about the requests, about how I'd given him $55,000 over 6 months, about the conversation in the car, about how he'd said I wasn't enough for him, that I'd made him into this. Frank nodded slowly. "You gave him money repeatedly and he resents you for it," he said. "That's not uncommon, actually. Happens more than you'd think with these entitled kids. The issue is that resentment you're describing. A kid like that, he blames you for the fact that you have boundaries. He sees your boundaries as judgment. He sees your refusal to keep enabling as rejection. Pete came over and sat down too, his body language softer than Frank's. "Look, the police can help with this," he said, "but where are you trying to get to?" "I need to get home. I'm in the Durham region. That's at least 2 hours south of here if traffic's decent. I don't have a way to get there without calling my brother, and I don't really want to involve my family in this if I can help it." I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet to admit out loud that my son had done this. Frank and Pete exchanged another look, the kind that comes from years of working together. Frank pulled out his phone. "Let me call my dispatch," he said. "I know other guys on this route. Maybe we can work something out." He walked away and I heard him talking quietly, explaining the situation. While he was on the phone, Pete got me a coffee and a sandwich from the convenience store counter. He didn't ask if I wanted them. He just brought them back and set them in front of me. "When you're cold and scared," he said, "you need calories. Don't worry about paying. The older one's got it." Frank came back over. "Okay, so here's the deal. Pete's heading south in about 10 minutes in his truck. He can take you most of the way, get you down to Barry at least. There's another driver, Jerry, who runs the same route and will be coming through maybe 30 minutes after we're supposed to head out. He can take it from there to get you even closer to your place. Between the two of them, you'll get home with minimal hassle. You understand? These truckers, they know each other. They've got networks built up over decades. They look out for each other, but they also look out for people who genuinely need help, who are in real trouble." That was something I didn't understand until that moment. When the OPP officer arrived, I explained the situation to him. I told him what had happened, where my son had dropped me off, exactly what he'd taken from me. The officer was professional and kind. He was probably in his 50s, with the bearing of someone who'd been doing this job for a long time. He said he'd file a report about the jacket and the bag, and there wasn't really much else they could do unless I wanted to press charges for abandonment. Did I want to do that? I hesitated. "He's my son," I said. "He's in crisis. I don't want to destroy my relationship with him. I don't want to go down that road if I can help it." The officer nodded slowly. He'd heard versions of this before, clearly. He'd heard it many times. Then he looked at Frank and Pete, who were standing nearby, and there was a moment of understanding that passed between them. He said, "These guys going to get you where you need to be?" I said yes. The officer nodded again. "I can see that." "Good people," he said, gesturing to Frank and Pete. "Then I'd suggest you get out of here. Get somewhere warm, and maybe think about whether you want to file that report. Just because he's your son doesn't mean what he did was okay." The officer gave me his information written on a card, told me to call if anything else happened, and then he shook my hand. He actually shook my hand like I was a person worthy of his respect, not just a victim. Then he left. Pete's truck was huge and warm and smelled like coffee and diesel fuel and the leather of a well-used cab. He had a sleeper cabin behind the main seat, and he gave me a thick blanket that smelled like his cologne and the road. For the next 3 hours, we drove south, and he told me stories about his life on the highway, about the different routes he'd driven, the people he'd met, the emergencies he'd witnessed. He told me about other people he'd picked up over the years, people in situations similar to mine, about how loneliness on the highway was something he understood deeply from both sides. He'd been divorced twice, he said. He understood what it meant to feel abandoned, to feel like the people you loved didn't want you anymore. This was his way of making up for the world's coldness. When he dropped me at a truck stop near Barry, he gave me his number written on a piece of paper with a pen that didn't have a cap. He said, "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. We got your back now," that's what he said. "We got your back, like I wasn't a stranger, like we had history." I was brought to tears by a stranger's kindness. There in the parking lot of a truck stop, my hands shaking as I held his number. Jerry picked me up at that truck stop about 30 minutes later, just like Frank had said. He was a smaller guy, quieter than Pete, but no less kind. For the final leg of the journey, he drove me most of the way to my exit, getting me to within 30 kilometers of my house. When he let me out, he said, "Get yourself somewhere warm, call your brother, and don't take that from your son. That's not okay." The anger in his voice when he said that surprised me. It surprised me that he cared enough to be angry about what had happened to me. They didn't know me. They had no reason to help me, but they did because it was the right thing to do, and because they understood what abandonment felt like. My brother picked me up from the last rest stop I called him from there, finally getting access to a phone at the service station, my voice breaking as I explained what had happened. He came immediately, no questions, just came, and I rode home in silence, wrapped in an old blanket he kept in his car for emergencies. When we got to the house, it was dark. It was maybe 8 o'clock at night. I went inside and I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table Patricia and I had eaten breakfast at for 35 years. The same table where I'd written that check to David back in May. I sat there in the darkness for a long time, just breathing, trying to understand how my son had become someone capable of doing this to me, how the boy I'd read stories to, who I'd helped with homework, who I'd held when he cried, had become this empty thing that could abandon his own father on the side of the highway. But more than that, I was thinking about Frank and Pete and Jerry. I was thinking about the goodness of strangers, the fact that people I'd never met were willing to help me without expecting anything in return. I was thinking about the fact that the world isn't as cold as it sometimes feels, that there's still good in it if you look for it. The next morning I called the bank and reported my credit card as stolen. I gave them David's name and explained that he'd taken it from my bag, that he'd stolen it when he abandoned me on the highway, that he'd taken my jacket too, a gift from my late wife, and my bag with all my identification and personal items. The woman on the phone said the card would be cancelled immediately. Did I want to press charges? I said I didn't know. I'd think about it. I went to the police station later that day and filed a formal report. I brought the officer all the details, the date, the time, the location on Highway 401, what he'd taken, what had happened. The officer was professional and kind, different from the highway officer, but with the same bearing of someone who'd seen this kind of thing before. He said they'd investigate. In the meantime, I should monitor my accounts for any fraudulent charges. I should also consider pressing charges for theft and abandonment. He said abandonment of a senior citizen was actually a criminal matter, but I said I wasn't sure. I needed to think about it. Then I waited to see what would happen next. I waited for David to realize what he'd done. I waited to see if he'd call and apologize. I waited to see what my son had actually charged on my credit card where he'd gone with my money and my jacket and my sense of trust. The credit card charges started appearing within hours. I was monitoring my account obsessively by that point, checking my phone every few minutes like it might tell me something different if I just looked hard enough. The first charge was $1,200 at a hotel chain in Kingston, one of those places that charges by the hour if you're not careful. Then another charge at a gas station, filling up the truck. Then restaurants, a lot of restaurants. Places I'd never been to, places that meant he was using my card without a second thought, without any hesitation. By the end of the first week, David had charged close to $8,000 on my credit card. $8,000. Meals, hotels, gas. What looked like shopping at some kind of electronics store, a concert venue. Things I couldn't even categorize because the merchant descriptions were vague. Every single charge felt like a knife in the back. Not because of the money, although that mattered, but because of what it represented. He wasn't trying to hide it. He wasn't being cautious. He was using my card like he owned it, like he had every right to take what was mine because I'd disappointed him, because I'd said no. The detective working my case, a woman named Sarah Chen from the Durham Regional Police, called me on Thursday. She'd been reviewing the charges and the security footage from the hotel in Kingston. Yes, it was definitely David. She had video of him checking in using my identification. She had receipts with his signature. She had everything she needed. She said the charges constituted fraud and theft, and combined with the abandonment on the highway, there was absolutely enough for a criminal charge. She asked me again if I wanted to proceed. I didn't answer immediately. I was sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen table where I'd given him the check back in May, and I was thinking about how I'd gotten to this point. How I'd gone from a father trying to help his son to a man sitting across from his son's crimes like it was somebody else's story. Yes, I said. Finally. Yes, I want to proceed. I want to file the charges. I'm done. She said she'd get a warrant. They'd arrest him within the next few days if he didn't turn himself in voluntarily. She said the most likely outcome was that he'd be charged and released pending trial, given that he had no criminal record and the courts viewed first-time offenders as lower risk. I asked her what the penalty would be if he was convicted. She said theft over $5,000 could carry a prison sentence of up to 10 years, depending on the circumstances and his history. Fraud carried similar penalties. Abandonment of a senior citizen was its own charge. So if all the charges stuck, he could be looking at significant time. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reading from a report because this was her job. She dealt with this kind of family destruction every single day. I didn't tell David. I didn't call him and warn him. I didn't give him a chance to run. Part of me wanted to maintain some kind of relationship despite everything. But another part of me, a part I was just beginning to recognize, understood that David didn't deserve a warning. He'd made a choice to abandon me. He'd made a choice to steal from me. He'd made a choice to use my card like I was nothing. Those choices had consequences, and I wasn't going to soften them for him anymore. The woman at the police station had told me something that stuck with me. She said that criminals always come back. They come back because they think they're smarter than everyone else. They think they can talk their way out of it. They think the people they've hurt will protect them because of familial obligation or shame or just plain exhaustion. But they're wrong. Not all the time, but most of the time. She said holding the line was the hardest thing, but the most important thing a victim could do. I thought about that while I waited. The waiting was harder than I expected. Friday came and went. I went through my house like I was cataloguing things. The kitchen table where we'd had breakfast when David was a kid, the living room where he'd watched cartoons, the backyard where I'd taught him to throw a baseball. Every corner of the house had a memory of him before he became this person who could abandon his father. I thought about calling him, just to hear his voice, just to convince myself that there was still time to salvage this. But I didn't. I thought about all the ways I could soften this, could find him a lawyer, could somehow make this easier on him. But I didn't do that either. I just waited. Saturday morning, my phone rang around 9 o'clock. It was David. Hey Dad, how's it going? His voice was casual, almost cheerful. Like he hadn't left me on the side of the highway, like he hadn't stolen from me, like nothing had happened at all, like he'd never even considered that I might have consequences waiting for him. I can't talk right now, I said, and I heard the relief in my own voice. Actually, I wanted to ask if I could come by the house later. Got something to tell you, something I want to celebrate with you. I felt my stomach flip. That's when I knew. That's when I understood that he was going to come here and he was going to tell me about my stolen credit card charges and he was going to brag about it. He was going to sit in my house and tell me how smart he was, how he'd finally figured it all out. Sure, I said, keeping my voice neutral, the voice I'd learned from Patricia come by around 2. I hung up and I sat there listening to the dial tone. He wanted to celebrate. He wanted to come to my house and celebrate with me, his father, the man he'd abandoned, the man he'd stolen from. He was going to walk into my home so full of himself, so convinced that he'd gotten away with something, that he was going to rub it in my face. I had time. I had until 2 o'clock to figure out what I was going to do. I spent those hours preparing myself. I gathered the police reports, I made copies. I organised everything on the kitchen table, laid it out like an exhibit in a courtroom. I practised my expression in the mirror. I needed to seem surprised when he told me about the charges. I needed to seem like I was hearing this for the first time. I needed to let him think he'd gotten away with it, just long enough to see the look on his face when I showed him the evidence. David arrived exactly at 2 o'clock, which was unusual for him. He was usually late for everything, another small rebellion, another way of saying that his time was more important than anyone else's. But not today. Today he was punctual because today he thought he was winning. I could see it in his walk as he came up the driveway, this swagger, this confidence he didn't usually have. He moved like someone who'd just won the lottery. He was wearing new clothes, expensive-looking clothes, the kind he never would have been able to afford on his own A-designer polo shirt. Shoes that probably cost more than my entire weekly grocery budget. All of it purchased with my stolen credit card. Probably felt great wearing them. Felt like he'd finally arrived, finally become the person he'd always wanted to be. He let himself in without knocking. He did that sometimes, treated my house like it was still his house, like he still had rights here, like being my son gave him permanent access to everything I owned. He walked into the kitchen where I was sitting at the table, and he pulled out a chair, spinning it backward and straddling it like we were in some kind of music video. He was practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad," he said, "I wanted to tell you first. I got a suite at the Sheraton in Kingston. 2 nights, the fancy room with the view, everything. Took some clients up there to network and man, it paid off. I closed a deal. A real deal this time. $15,000 in commission. $15,000. He leaned back in the chair, completely satisfied with himself. I thought about the hotel charges on my credit card, the $1,700 suite, the meals, the minibar charges, all of it. His face was shining with pride, and it broke my heart because I knew exactly where that money had come from. He was bragging about my stolen credit card charges, about the money he'd taken from me, and he was spinning it into this narrative where he was a Success, where he was finally making something of himself, finally proving to me that he wasn't a failure, finally showing me that all those years of doubting him had been wrong. "I'm so proud of you, David," I said carefully, and I meant it. I was proud. I was proud that I'd made the right choice. I was proud that I'd held the line. "Tell me more about this deal." I want to hear everything he launched into a story, something about commercial properties and investors, and how he'd finally figured it all out. He talked about a development company looking to expand, about how he'd positioned himself perfectly, about how everything was finally lining up. As he talked, I kept my expression neutral, kept my voice encouraging, kept playing the part of the father who was finally seeing his son succeed. And as he talked, I was watching his face, the way his eyes lit up when he described the deal, the way his hands moved as he explained things. He was animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. He looked alive. And I hated that this was happening. Hated that he was alive in this moment because he'd stolen from me. I was thinking about the truckers on the highway, about Frank and Pete and Jerry and their simple kindness. I was thinking about the OPP officer who'd shaken my hand. I was thinking about my wife Patricia, who had always believed in consequences, who had always said that love sometimes meant letting people experience the results of their choices. She used to say that protecting people from consequences was like leaving a bridge with a broken railing. You think you're helping by not telling them about the danger, but really you're just making sure they fall the moment they're not paying attention. I let him finish his whole story. I let him talk for 20 minutes about this supposed deal. I let him get to the part where he talked about how he'd used the hotel as a base to make his calls and his deals. The networking, he called it the hustle. I let him talk about the meals he'd had with potential investors, the meetings in the hotel conference rooms, all of it. All of it purchased with my money, all of it a lie wrapped up in the paper of a success that never happened. Then, when he finally stopped talking, when he'd completely exhausted himself with the telling of it, I stood up and I walked to the living room, and I came back with a folder. I held it in my hands for a moment, looking at my son sitting in my kitchen in his expensive new clothes, looking at him like this was the moment everything changed, because it was. I opened the folder slowly in front of him. "These are the police reports," I said. "This is the fraud investigation. This is the theft report. This is the abandonment charges." David's face went white. The colour drained out of it like someone had pulled a plug. I pulled out my phone and showed him the detective's notes. "She's been watching the hotel security footage," I said. "She's got video of you checking in with my ID. She's got your signature on the receipt. She's got every single charge documented. The Sheraton suite was $1,700. David, you charged $1,700 of my money to a hotel room. One night would have been bad enough. 2 nights is worse, but it's not even the worst part. The worst part is that you came here today and you bragged about it. You came here and you tried to make me feel like I'd failed you, when really you've been stealing from me the whole time." He stood up, and for a moment I thought he might bolt. His face had gone from white to red. He looked shocked, confused, like he couldn't process that his plan wasn't actually working. But he didn't bolt. Instead, he sat back down slowly like his legs had stopped working, and he looked at me like I'd betrayed him, like I was the villain in this story you called the cops on me. His voice was small, almost a whisper, like that was the worst thing I could have possibly done, like I'd committed some kind of unforgivable sin against him, like he wasn't the one who'd abandoned his elderly father on the side of the highway, like he wasn't the one who'd stolen from me, like he wasn't the one who'd looked me in the eye and lied about every single thing. I reported the theft of my credit card. I said calmly, "I reported your abandonment of me. I reported the fact that you broke my trust and then had the arrogance to come to my house and brag about it to my face." He said nothing. He just stared at me. I could see him processing this, trying to figure out if there was some way to talk his way out of it, some angle he hadn't considered. Then he started to cry, and I didn't know what to do with that. I'd spent 7 days preparing for anger, for defiance, for more manipulation, but the crying caught me off guard. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. I made a huge mistake. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought if I could just prove to you that I was successful, that I could make it on my own without your help, then you'd see that I was worth something, that I was worth your time and your money and your faith, that you'd be proud of me." I listened to him cry, and I felt something crack open inside me. The anger was still there, hot and sharp, but underneath it was something else. Sadness, maybe. The sadness of watching your child become someone you don't recognize. The sadness of knowing that all the ways you tried to help had somehow made things worse instead of better. The sadness of understanding that by enabling him, I'd taught him that there were no consequences. But I also knew that feeling sorry for him wasn't enough, that understanding his pain didn't undo the things he'd done, that love sometimes means staying the course, even when it hurts. I'm going to be honest with you, David. I said I reported the crimes. The police know who you are. They have a warrant. They're going to come for you, probably today or tomorrow. You can turn yourself in voluntarily, or you can wait for them to show up at your apartment. Either way, this is happening. This is real. He looked at me, and his expression changed from sadness to something harder, something angrier. The tears stopped abruptly, like someone had turned off a faucet. "This is your fault," he said. "This is because you never believed in me. This is because you're a vindictive old bastard who couldn't stand to see his son succeed, who can't stand the fact that I might be better than you." I stood up and I walked to the kitchen window. I didn't want to look at him. I didn't want to engage with that narrative anymore. I didn't want to explain myself or justify my choices or defend my position. I'd learned something from Patricia that had taken me 7 days to remember. When someone is drowning, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is throw them a rope instead of jumping in after them. I said, "In about 30 seconds, you're going to leave my house. You're going to go turn yourself into the police, or you're going to go hide and they'll find you, and it will be worse for you. Either way, this is over. This is done. I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm not going to catch you when you fall. I'm not going to soften the landing. You've made your choices, and now you get to live with them." David sat there for another moment, and then he did something I'll never forget. He stood up and he walked toward me, and for a second I thought he might hit me. My body tensed. My hand went to the counter. I was ready for violence because I'd been ready for violence since I realized what he'd done. But he didn't hit me. Instead, he just stood there and he said, "I'm going to tell them you're lying. I'm going to tell them you gave me that card voluntarily. I'm going to tell them you wanted to help me, and now you're just mad that I succeeded. I'm going to tell them this is all a misunderstanding." He wasn't a physical threat, but he was threatening me anyway, telling me he'd turn this around, that he'd find some way to make me the bad guy in this story. "Go ahead," I said. "But they've got the hotel security footage. They've got your signature on the receipt. They've got credit card statements. They've got the abandonment charge with a police report filed from the highway with a witness statement from the OPP officer. They've got me saying what happened, and they'll believe the evidence. They'll believe the facts, and they'll believe me." He left without another word. He just turned and walked out the door, and I stood in my kitchen listening to his car start, listening to him rev the engine like he was angry at it, listening to him drive away faster than was safe. I watched him disappear down the street from my kitchen window, and I felt something settle in my chest, a heaviness, but also a kind of peace. I'd done the right thing. I knew I had, but it didn't feel good. The police showed up at his apartment that evening. Detective Chen called me the next morning to tell me that David had been arrested without incident. He'd been charged with fraud, theft, and abandonment of a senior citizen. He'd been released pending trial on the condition that he not contact me directly, and that he surrender his passport. His first court date was set for 3 weeks later. I felt nothing when she told me. I was numb. I'd expected to feel vindicated or angry or something, but all I felt was tired. I felt like I'd been running for a long time and had finally stopped, and now my body was catching up with how exhausted I was. The next few months were strange. I got my jacket back. Someone from evidence returned it in a plastic bag, cleaned but still creased from being crumpled in David's car. I held it in my hands for a long time before I could put it away. The fact that it was cleaned somehow made it worse. I felt like I was supposed to be grateful that they'd tried to restore it to its original condition, but it wasn't the same jacket anymore. Patricia had bought it for me. She'd seen it in a window and thought of me. Now it was just evidence that had been catalogued and processed and returned. I got my wallet back. The credit card company cleared the fraudulent charges. I was made whole, or as whole as a person could be after something like that. But the house felt different. Everything felt different. I'd spent so many years trying to make David proud, trying to be the kind of father who was generous and trusting and open. I'd thought those were good things. I'd thought they were virtues. I'd thought that being that kind of father meant I could prevent suffering, prevent pain, prevent my son from ever having to experience real disappointment. But I'd confused being generous with being a doormat. I'd confused being trusting with being naive. I'd confused being open with having no boundaries at all. The trial happened in March. David pleaded guilty to most of the charges, which meant there was no trial, really. No drama, no cross-examination, no opportunity for me to face him in court and tell my side of the story in front of a judge. Just a guilty plea and a sentencing hearing. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with the bearing of someone who'd seen every variation of human failure imaginable. She read the charges, she reviewed the evidence, she listened to David's statement about his regrets and his circumstances. Then she turned to me and asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood up. I said that David was my son and I would always love him. But that love didn't mean ignoring what he'd done. Love meant holding him accountable. Love meant not accepting excuses. Love meant believing that he was capable of better and insisting that he do better. The judge nodded like she'd heard something she'd heard many times before. She sentenced him to 18 months in provincial jail and ordered him to pay restitution, $8,000 for the credit card fraud, $5,000 for the abandonment and emotional damages, all of it to be paid upon his release. I attended the sentencing because I needed to. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know that this had really happened, that David had made these choices, that there were real consequences for treating people, treating me, the way he had. When they led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked at me. Just for a second, but he looked at me. His eyes were red. He looked smaller than I remembered him being. I don't know what he was trying to communicate. Regret, maybe, or blame, or something I couldn't read. I didn't look away. I held his gaze until he was gone, and as he disappeared through the courtroom door, I felt tears on my face. I was crying for my son. I was crying for the father I'd been. I was crying for the family we'd lost. The healing started slowly. I got my life back together piece by piece. I fixed the roof that I'd been putting off for 2 years. I serviced the furnace. I cleaned out Patricia's closet, something I hadn't been able to do before. I donated her clothes to charity, kept only a few things I wanted to remember her by: a scarf, a sweater, a pair of glasses she used to wear when she was reading. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Mills, who helped me understand why I'd been so willing to set myself on fire for David. We talked about Patricia, about grief, about loneliness, about the ways that love can become codependency if you're not careful. We talked about the fact that my inability to say no had hurt David as much as it had hurt me, that by giving him money unconditionally, I'd sent him the message that there were no consequences for his actions, that maybe if I'd held boundaries earlier, he wouldn't have reached this place. We talked about forgiveness and what that actually means, and whether it requires reconciliation. It doesn't, Dr. Mills told me. Forgiveness is about letting go of the anger so that it stops poisoning your life. It doesn't mean you have to have a relationship with the person who hurt you. It just means you stop letting their choices damage you. That made sense to me. It gave me permission to move forward without David. I didn't visit David in jail. He wrote me letters and I read some of them before I put them in a drawer. He talked about his time, about what he was learning, about his regrets. In one letter, he asked if I would pick him up when he was released. He said he wanted to start over, that he understood now what he'd done, that he wanted to rebuild our relationship. I didn't respond. I put that letter in the drawer with the others. Maybe someday I would be ready for that conversation, but not yet. Not while the wound was still so fresh. My brother and I became closer. He checked in regularly, made sure I was eating, made sure I was managing financially. We talked about David sometimes, but not often. My brother had a different take on it. He said David made his choices, and now David had to live with them. He said I wasn't responsible for saving David from himself. That was David's job. My job was to take care of me. So that's what I did. I took care of myself. I took care of my house. I tended Patricia's garden, which had grown wild during those months when I was giving David money instead of living my own life. I read books again. I went to the movies with my brother. I remembered what it felt like to be a person with a life, not just a person defined by their relationship to someone who was destroying them. The truckers reached out a few months after everything happened. Frank sent me a letter through the mail, which was surprising because I'd only given my number to Pete and Jerry. He must have gotten it from them somehow, must have tracked it down or asked around in the letter. He talked about how he'd been thinking about me, hoping I was doing okay. He said that what David did was wrong, and that I'd done the right thing by reporting it. He said that sometimes people need to learn hard lessons, and that wasn't weakness on my part to hold him to that. That was wisdom. That was the hard choice. He included his address, told me to reach out if I ever needed anything. He wrote that life is too short to spend it on people who don't appreciate you. I still have that letter. I've read it probably 50 times. I sent him a thank you card and he sent me another letter, and we've been in touch ever since. We call every few weeks. He sends me postcards from different cities where he's driven. One of them has a photo of the 401 highway, and on the back he wrote, "This is where we found you." He's become like an older brother to me, which is funny because he's probably only 5 years older than I am. They became the family I needed, in a weird way. Not family by blood, but family by choice. They knew who I was. They didn't judge me. They just showed up on a cold November night and helped me get home. That's a kind of love that's different from family love, but it's real. It's powerful. It matters. The thing I understand now is that love without boundaries isn't actually love. It's fear. It's the fear of being alone. It's the fear of not being needed. It's the fear that if you don't give everything, you won't be enough. And that's a poison. That's a slow-acting poison that drains you dry until there's nothing left. I spent decades with Patricia learning that real love includes the word no. Learning that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. Learning that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is let someone experience the consequences of their choices. Patricia knew that. She lived that. She died believing that, I think. And I forgot it. I forgot it when she was gone and I was lonely. I forgot it when David started calling and I was desperate to feel needed. But I've remembered it now. I've remembered it the hard way, by nearly destroying myself. And I won't forget it again. David was released after 16 months for good behaviour. He served his time, paid his restitution in instalments, and tried to reach out to me multiple times. I saw him once, about a year after his release. He showed up at the house without calling first, which was typical. I almost didn't let him in. But I did, because Dr. Mills had helped me understand that closure might be possible, that hearing what he had to say might help me move forward. He apologised. He said he was in a 12-step program for his behavioural issues. He said he understood now that he'd had a lot of problems, that abandoning me had been a crisis point for him, that it had forced him to face things he'd been avoiding. He said he didn't expect me to forgive him. He just wanted me to know that he understood what he'd done and that he was trying to be better. I listened. I didn't respond much, but I did listen. And after he left, I thought about what he'd said. I thought about whether I could forgive him, and I decided that maybe, someday, I could. But that day wasn't today. That day was still in the future, and I was okay with that. I was okay with taking my time. I was okay with being cautious. I was okay with not rushing into anything that didn't feel right. There's a lesson in all this, I think. It's not that love is bad, or that you shouldn't help your family. It's that love needs to be accompanied by self-respect. It needs to include boundaries. It needs to be smart and careful, the way you'd be with anything precious. Because you are precious. Your time is precious. Your money is precious. Your well-being is precious. And if you don't protect those things, no one else will. David learned that lesson in jail. I learned it through nearly losing everything. The truckers knew it all along. They knew it from experience, from seeing people on the highway, from understanding what happens when people stop believing they're worth taking care of. They knew it, and they showed me, and they saved me. That's something I'll never forget. That's something that changed my life. Sometimes the people who matter most aren't the people you're related to. Sometimes they're strangers on the highway who see you broken down on the side of the road and stop to help. Sometimes they're the ones who teach you what family really means.